could I look my staff in the face and say that the next 5 years of their life was going to be the biggest impact to humanity working on this product?
Scott, I am so excited for this. I've wanted to do this one for a long time. So first, thank you so much for joining me today.
Of course, this is a pleasure.
Now, 20 years, it's an incredible journey. I just want to go back to the very beginning. You and Mike sitting in a room together. Just take me to that founding moment before we dive in.
So Mike and I started Atlassian graduating out of college, and neither of us wanted to get a real job. He had dropped out of his degree to do a startup that he eventually sold, and then he worked in a tech company for a bit. I was coming at it cold. I didn't have any entrepreneurial experience, but I didn't want to go work for a bank and insurance company. And so we tried a bunch of different things around software. We tried doing third-party support. Eventually, we built a product called Jira. And 22 years later, 250,000 customers, 11,000 staff. Like, it's sort of grown a lot since the two of us.
Did you love the problem of Jira? You said there about kind of working on software and bouncing around different products to find what worked. Did you love the problem of Jira? I'm always trying to understand whether you do have to focus on something you love.
Look, I'm a firm believer that two things. One is that you've got to love what you do. Otherwise, someone else out there who's just as smart as I am, who is more passionate about what I'm doing, will beat me like every single day of the week. So I'm a firm believer you need to be passionate about what you do. At the same time, I think there's an aspect of you, when you get good at something, well, you learn to love it more. And I think you need to, try something on for size. And so for me specifically, I've always loved building software. Like, love the idea that you can create something out of nothing, write some code, and it, controls this thing called a computer. So I've always loved that. And, if you said, hey, would you, is bug tracking like what your life is going to be, like for the next 20 years, which is what Jira originally started with. I don't think I would have said, yes, that's my life's calling. But when I look at what we've done around, turning that, initial starting point into a great company that people will have to work at. And our mission now is to unleash the potential of every team. And so I get super jazzed about that mission.
I totally agree with you in terms of getting jazzed about that mission. I was actually chatting to my girlfriend last night, and I was telling her about having you on the show today. And naturally, she was very excited being an Australian. But she was like, it's so huge in Australia, like it is all over. But did they know it was going to be as successful in the early days? And my question to you there is, like, the Trade Desk, the very famous company in the US that's public, didn't raise money early on because they didn't think it would actually be very big. When you started, did you always know that it would be this behemoth that it is today? Or did that come over time?
Before I answer that question, I just really want to give you credit for that Australian accent you tried to attempt just then. I thought that was very, very well done.
You know what? I actually do it quite a lot, so I would be lying if I said it wasn't very rehearsed at this point.
We started in what I would say is the nuclear winter of technology, which was the dot-com crash of 2001. We had that with September 11. Like, no one was raising money to start a company in 2001. Which is great because we got to bootstrap Atlassian for a long, long time. It took us 10 years before we brought VCs on board, and we didn't take any money onto the balance sheet for 15 years. So, we really, really did bootstrap Atlassian for a long time. And I think it's because the world was changing and no one else was raising money at the time. I think companies grow up in their environments, like in a symbiosis, and the environment we grew up in was one where you could build a company without raising venture capital. I think today, if you were doing an AI startup, the environment's slightly different, right? Like, you're not going to be bootstrapping your AI startup these days. And so, like, for us, like, we were just really lucky to grow up in that era.
Do you think your pathway would still be possible today, given the abundance of funding that we have today, even in a tougher economic time?
I think it depends on what you're going after and the niche or niches Americans say that you're going after, because if there are thousands of other companies or dozens of other companies going after the same customer that you are, and they've raised 10 times, 100 times like more money than you have, they're going to be able to solve their customers' needs a lot quicker than you are. But there are many markets like that go after very, very small, like, niche software. Constellation Software is a public company out there that does a lot of this, where they literally invest in reservation systems for dog kennels or something, right? Like, very niche stuff. And in those situations, I do think you can bootstrap businesses, still today, because there is not much competition there.
Can I ask you, what do you think are the biggest BS myths about startup and company building? Some is, you have to raise funding very early, otherwise you're going to be outcompeted. Many say you have to love what you do as one. I disagree with that one. Do you think there are any real startup BS myths that you hear and you're like, fuck no?
I think there's a belief that, startups are glamorous. And I don't think that is necessarily the case. I think there's a survivor bias there, of people you talk 2 or 3 years in, but most startups are really freaking hard. Most startups really fail hard. I think the glamorous aspect of a startup nature is a bit hyped, and it definitely wasn't glamorous when we started. There was no companies that did what we did. The startup meant I didn't get a real job, which meant you were unemployed. And I actually remember my girlfriend was an investment banker at the time. People would say, a female investment banker is very, very rare even today. It was very rare back in 20 years ago. And people would ask her, "What does your boyfriend do?" And she'd say, "He's doing a startup." And then they would say, "Well, that's you mean he's unemployed?" And so that was kind of the belief back then. And so, I think it's not as glamorous as people make out today.
I think my girlfriend says the same, and they say he's unemployed too, and that's in London. So I'm not sure we've really progressed that far. Actually, I think she says he's a podcaster, ignores the venture fund, ignores everything else, which is even more insulting. Can I ask you mentioned it being hard. What's the most striking near-death experience? I spoke to Mike before the show, and he said about the incredible times together, but also very challenging times. And I say near-death experience, which comes to mind first?
Let me tell a story about what happened on my honeymoon. Actually, is an interesting one.
He told me to ask about this one.
Did he? Okay, good. In 2010, we got married. I did a destination wedding with my wife in Vietnam. No affinity to the country apart from we loved it. We had 50 of our closest friends there at a resort, and 5-day affair. And from there, we flew to Africa, to Botswana, to do safaris, basically. And I wouldn't recommend, safaris on a honeymoon. You sort of get up at 4 a.m, you take your malaria drugs, you see animals really early in the morning, then you try and sleep through the day, then hours in the afternoon. And we were in unseasonal mosquito territory. One of the deserts had rained for the first time in 20 years. And so,
this is a confluence of really sexy events coming together.
Yeah, totally. And so I'm literally killing mosquitoes on the tablecloth of our dinner, thing, and killing 100 of them. So we sort of have this not great, honeymoon in terms of the location. And then we were just about to head to a really lush, verdant green, beautiful, place, outside of the safari. That night I got a message from Mike, and the message had to go from Australia to South Africa to Botswana to then on a radio signal to someone who then drove, 20 miles in a truck to give us this message. It was kind of a form of whispers all the way along. And the message literally just said, "Call me urgently, Mike." And Mike was the only person in the world who knew how to get in contact with me. So if my parents had died, that's the message I would get. If my siblings had died, whatever bad things in the world could happen, that was the message I would have got. So then I had to sleep through the night because there was no way to get out. And the next morning, we were transiting, and so we travelled back into a place where I could get telephone reception. And I called Mike from the tarmac of the airport, and what's going on, man? And it turned out that back then, a solo hacker had got into one of our systems. Back in 2010, the concept of there being hackers and that type of stuff happening was really unknown. There hadn't been hacking scandals or anything like this. And the bit I forgot at the start of the story was that after the honeymoon, I was actually flying directly from the honeymoon to the US to raise our first dollar of venture capital. And so we had lined up 5 VC interviews for that week. So we were sort of on a high. I just got married. I was about to go raise money for the first time. We'd run Atlassian for 10 years and hadn't really taken money off the table in any way. So this is going to, secure my kids' financial security. So we go from that to standing on a tarmac, and, Mike is saying that, hey, we've been hacked in some way, but we've got all hands on deck. And we had people sleeping in the office. We actually took out the hotel next door to the office, the coffee cart, is basically if you say you're from Atlassian, like we'll fix you up, like, and everyone got free coffee. And for about 3 or 4 days, like the entire company had been on 100%, working through this, and I've got experience about how to deal with this. So then I have to turn to my wife and be like, my new wife, as only, a few days, and say, hey, I think we need to cut our honeymoon short because I need to go back and deal with this crisis that is happening in the company. If there's any conversation you want to have with your newlywed wife, it's not we're cutting our honeymoon short to go back.
What did she say?
She said, that's what we need to do. That's what we need to do. So we got to have one day at this beautiful resort, and while we waited for the flight out, and then I flew directly back to Australia and basically relieved Mike, we tag teamed and ran the investigation. We called these VCs up to tell them what had happened because we felt, openness and transparency was important, even though it may have never come out, may have never come out publicly. We told VCs, we told customers, because I guess that's who we are. And it turned out the VCs were very nonplussed about it. They said, well, actually, this happens all the time, just no one talks about it. Like, oh, wow, we didn't know. So then the next week, I was back working for 3 or 4 days, then jumped on a plane, and maybe we did back-to-back VC interviews for 5 different companies.
Can I interrupt and ask, where was the company at this stage? Because I've never heard this. Like, we often hear, like, oh, you raised one, this round of funding 10 years in, and how amazing. Like, where was the company at?
About a $60 million run rate, I think. Like,
okay.
Actually, we'll come back on that later about rocket ship growth, but I think we were maybe a bit more than that, but something in that range, like sub $100 million.
And how much were you going out asking for in the raise?
So when we did this, we told people that it's one-shot closed envelope bidding, because I believe that was the best way to get a result, because the way most VCs do it is they give you an indicative offer and then they sort of talk amongst themselves and then they kind of agree on a price, and there's a bit of a collusion that can often happen there, and they sort of do a price that's enough to get in the door, and then they get a second chance to up their number. And I felt that was not the right way to do it. There was not enough game theory involved in that. And I actually had a fight with my CFO at the time about this, because he said it's not the way these things are done. And I said, I don't care about the way things are done. So we actually got closed envelope bids. We said, hey, we want to raise, I don't know, you tell us how much we raise, tens of millions of dollars, but you tell us how much you want you to put in. And then you tell us what the valuation was. So we're on $60 million of revenue. I think we were doing 20 or 30% profit margins. So we're making decent money at the bottom line. And the valuations we got back varied between, there was one sort of high hundreds. There was 3 of them ended up in the $200 to $300 million range. And Excel, who ended up, winning for us, came back at $405 million US dollars, which looks back crazy. That's like a 5 times valuation, like 5 or 6 times revenue, valuation, on what we were doing back then. Back then, that was a lot of money. They put $60 million into the company.
Did you take it because of the price being the highest?
So we pre-screened them. We only invited people that we thought we would have on our board and be happy to grow with and go on this journey with. So once we pre-screened them all, we then told them that we would choose the highest bidder.
Can I ask you, when you think about that, bluntly, there's brands and then there's actually people. Sometimes people are different to the brand, and Excel and Ryan are amazing, but trust in a relationship, I think, is important. When you take your approach, you don't have time to build that trust, that authenticity in a partnership. Is that a problem, or do you think VCs aren't really your partner and so fuck it?
No, VCs are definitely our partner, but we spent all that time up front. VCs had been knocking on our door for years to invest in Atlassian. And so I'd had multiple conversations, breakfasts, dinners with all the people, all 5 firms that were bidding and all the partners that were bidding. We had Peter Fenton over at Benchmark. We had Byron Dieter over at Bessemer. We had Rich Wong at Excel, who ended up being the company we went with. So I knew these people really well. We'd spent a lot of time with them. And so it was like, hey, there's not, we can choose any of them, put your best foot forward. And actually, we went back to Peter Fenton at Benchmark was, I think, the runner-up bidder. And we went back to Excel and said, hey, look, all things considered, maybe we should get 2 VCs, in there, even though there's a huge difference in valuation. And we went back to Peter Fenton and told him if he matched Excel's price, Excel were happy to split the deal with him. I don't know how much Excel's made off us, it's 100 times, I think, something like that, when they're distributed. So, Peter Fenton could have put in $30 million at 100 times. That's $3 billion back. 30% for a benchmark is $1 billion. Like 6 partners, probably $160 million each, I guess. So anyway, I think Peter regrets that second chance draw that we gave him.
I'm going to be honest. I don't think they need the money, but fuck, that is a mess. I mean, I love Peter. He's come on the show many times and he's a friend, but that is one that keeps you up at night. Whew.
Yeah, but again, I think if we hadn't, after we would have invested forward, we would have got a valuation in that sort of $200 to $300 million range, because that's where most people averaged to, and we got the outlier. We actually raised money from before we went public, the year before we went public, to give some employees some liquidity and to get in a public market investor. We ran the same process. And actually, the numbers were almost exactly the same, just out of zero. We got, I think, 5 firms to bid then as well. And we got a couple of valuations in the $1 billion range, a couple in the 2 to 3, and then one at the $4 billion range. We kind of ran the same process later on as well, and it worked really well.
Can I ask you, that's obviously a mistake that one regrets not paying up for, clearly. When you think about decisions that you've made that you regret, what stands to mind as the biggest?
When you're small as a company, or what I found when we were small as a company, the mistakes are mistakes of commission. Like you do something stupid that didn't make sense, or you invested time in something that ultimately was a waste of time. I think when we get larger, most of the mistakes I've made are of omission, not doing something that we should have done. And most of the opportunities or biggest mistakes we've made are not going hard enough about new opportunities. We're about a $4 billion business, like revenue-wise, valued at $40 to $50 billion, today in 2023. But, we had a competitor to GitHub, that we built, called Bitbucket. We had a competitor to Slack that we built. And in both cases, I'd argue we had as good a product. In many cases, I think against Slack, we had a better product, but we didn't invest enough behind these new opportunities. And so my biggest mistakes are being in the right place in the right time, but not betting hard enough behind, the opportunities that we've had in front of us.
How does that make you change go forward? Do you invest more aggressively then in everything? How does that change your mindset moving forward?
Investment has to come from somewhere. So the hard part is you got to starve something else to invest in the new thing. And we started a program we call Point A, and where we incubate new products inside Atlassian. And those new products, we've got one called Atlas, which is about OKRs and projects. We've got one called Compass, which is about really a developer portal that basically tracks everything developers do these days in components and microservices. And I can get on the list, we created like 4 or 5 of these things. And we've just made sure that we've invested sufficiently behind these new areas such that in 5 years' time, we're not sitting here saying we created a category and someone else stole it from us. We've created these amazing categories and we're investing heavily behind them.
Do you think the single biggest job of a CEO is resource allocation?
I've got an article basically that I bring up every couple of years, and I'll put it in the show notes. Basically, it's like the 4 things a CEO should do. And one of them is, effectively hire and fire the management team. 2 is basically set the vision for the company. 3 is set the culture for the company. And 4 is basically resource allocation, where you put the dollars and the bets. And those 4 things are the most important. And I go back to that article probably every single year to remind myself, look at my diary and say, how much of my time am I spending on those 4 areas? And so, resource allocation is one of those 4.
Should they be equally weighted time-wise? Should it be 25% each?
I don't think resource allocation is something you do every single day. I think if you're doing that, you're probably not going to see the forest for the trees. And so it depends on the size of company you are, but I'd say quarterly is a more reasonable cadence for resource allocation. And the larger you get, the harder it is to steer the ship. We at Atlassian went through a huge process to move it from annually to quarterly a couple of years ago. And so we still do it quarterly.
Scott, what are you best at? What are you worst at? If you do a report card for yourself on those 4.
I don't know, that's my best. If I did best and worst, I'm not sure I'd categorize them in those 4 categories. So if you let me deviate from that question, the things I'm best at in the world, I think, is systems thinking, like really understanding if I change this knob over here, what's going to happen to the entire system. I read a lot of physics books all the way to psychology. I try to just map how does the universe work, and that's a real strength of mine.
Can anyone be a systems thinker? And what does it take to be a good systems thinker?
I think to be a good systems thinker, you have to be incredibly curious across a large range of disciplines. I think systems thinking involves the people that need to be involved and like our customers and the market dynamics. And the great thing about running a business is it's rewarding and complicated and just changing every single day in a way that almost no other field does. And so I love running a business because it's like rewarding and intellectually challenging and stimulating. But I also spend a lot of time, curious about, how things work.
Is that challenging for you as a CEO also? Because like I heard from Mike, from Kim, from many that you were so intellectually curious, but you have to be focused. Is it difficult to rein in your curiosity and remain focused?
Oh, you just hit on my worst, my weakest point, which is prioritization of what is important. And I really have to step back because I can get so excited by almost anything. I can get excited by the UI mock-up in a product. I can get excited by the next great marketing idea that, I come up with. And so, I need to surround myself with other people who are really good at helping prioritize.
How do you think about this as a leader, say, with AI? Like, bluntly, as a public company, everyone's told you have to have an AI story. You have to have an AI narrative. I get it, but you're also a very successful, sustaining business with great customers already. How do you think about that need to have an AI narrative, an AI story, but also just remembering the amazing business we have?
The history of technology, with the way I would write it, is that it's very much a winner-takes-all market. And once there's a winner established in a market, it's hard to disrupt them except when there's a technological change. And if I go back through the waves of change, I would say we went from mini computers mainframes to mini computers, which is before my time. Then we went to desktop PCs in the 90s, and you see companies emerge and see companies decline, right? Like you saw, DEC, and a whole bunch of mini computer people didn't make it to the PC, and instead you saw sort of IBM and Microsoft rise. And then the internet came around, and you saw Microsoft wane a little bit, and you saw a rise of Netscape and Google and eBay and PayPal and so forth. And then mobile came around and didn't really displace anyone, but Apple suddenly came back into the fore, and Microsoft continued to sort of miss that area. And then you saw, I guess, public cloud, which changed a lot of enterprise stuff, but not much for consumer. They didn't care where things were running. And now we're seeing AI. And I think, again, at each of these changes, you see some companies continue to survive. Some companies, rise from the ashes, and some companies don't make the transition. And so, as much as it's the next greatest buzzword out there, I do think that there's going to be a big change in how technology works and change the landscape. Honestly, I think you'll look in 5 years' time, and the list of top companies may look very different to today. So I don't think you can avoid having an AI strategy as a company.
What do you think will separate the existing incumbents who adopt AI winning versus losing?
Look, I think we're still in phase one of AI, where people are adding AI to existing products out there. And so everyone needs to do that. But a lot of people are doing the simple parlor trick, which is let's just summarize some text, or let's, give me 10 bullet points. And look, that is a commodity now. Whether you're using OpenAI or any of the other ones, it's going to be a commodity. I think the real interesting things happen where you've got multiple unique data sets and you can bring them together to do different things. For example, I think getting help from someone else, like another human, is going to become much more a search problem than it used to be, because, to solve someone's problem, the data probably exists somewhere in a knowledge base, in someone else's support ticket or whatever, to solve your problem. And I think Atlassian's in a unique spot to be able to, to solve those types of workflows. Or if you're, a bug report comes in, from, or even just a log file, you've got an iPhone application and it has an error. Great, that error, let's go back and work out who wrote the code and why did they write it? And can we fix that error? Can we fix that error and automatically deploy it to a customer? What happens? So once we can tie workflows across large, surface area and tie data sets across large surface area, I think that's where magic happens. It's still unclear what the UI looks like for those things. Is it chat interface? Is it a traditional interface? Is it voice? Is it just bots talking to each other? I don't think we know, but I do think the data and the workflows are going to be really important.
To what extent do you aggressively allocate towards AI today versus appreciating we're still in phase one? A lot of the money will be burnt in productive ways, but still burnt because you need to burn it for progression to happen often. To what extent do you aggressively allocate versus do, but tentatively, in the knowledge that we're still in phase one?
We have, multiple thousands of engineers in Atlassian, and we have multiple hundreds of engineers working on, AI, things at the moment. What we do, if you look at our data is our customers' data. Like, we don't control our data. We're not like Bloomberg, where it's like we have 50 years worth of trades that we can, put into a large language model. Like, we have our customers' data and we need to help our customers access it better. So we don't have to make the huge lift and investments of, building our own large language model or building, our own thing across companies, across, data sets. So what we do need to do is integrate them in interesting new ways. And so I think that's not wasted work, because, if we can work out what the most useful way of doing that is, I think that's going to be, time well spent. And yes, you could wait, I guess, till that paradigm has been, sorted out. But, I think by the time like Uber worked out the exact way to order a car, and that it was cars and not limos and stuff like that, it was hard for other people to catch up, because they had an advantage. And it's not just understanding what works, it's often understanding what doesn't work. And you can't really buy your way into knowing what doesn't work. You can buy your way into what does, but still have to go through that process of like walking random walks to work out what doesn't work.
Is Atlassian able to be fast enough to move with the speed of AI changing today? Just out of respect to stature, public company status, size of team, are you able to move fast enough?
There's some interesting things there. Look, obviously, the smaller the company is, the faster you can move. There's a saying that, like, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I think that's the difference between small companies and big companies. Like, if you want to go far, if you want to have a big impact, we have a whole bunch of advantages that we can do. When we run AI experiments, we can run them with 250,000 customers. Like, we want to find, hey, how can this work with a search problem work? We've got customers with 20 years worth of data, and terabytes worth of data that we can, work with them to run experiments on. And so, yes, we've got, more overhead than a normal company, a smaller company would have. But if you look at, can we move fast? Yes, we have these other advantages that allow us to move fast, particularly in the AI area where it's about data. If you're an AI startup and you don't have access to customer data and customers to test with, that can actually make you move slower.
I mean, that's one thing. The other thing is how you set up your teams. Something that's very unique about Atlassian also is the remote work nature of it. Will that persist? How do you think about that? And what do you might talk about when you say about the team structure being remote?
Early on in the pandemic, so I don't know, March, April of 2020, when the world was still kind of trying to work out what this, new world would look like, Mike and I, had both not been to the office for a month or two because we'd shut our offices down. And we knew that COVID was going to go for multiple years. And we knew that during that time, we wanted to keep hiring people. And if we did that, like, are we going to hire people who were going to work from home but have to live within 25 kilometers an office, 50 kilometers an office, 30 miles of an office for your American listeners? We decided no, we wanted to hire people. And given we had offices around the world, we had people in Australia, the UK, the US, Europe, we wanted to basically allow us to continue hiring. And so we made the decision that we would never require someone to come back into an office, which is probably not dissimilar to other people like out there who sort of made that decision by abdication. Like, that kind of ended up what's happening is, during COVID, people could work anywhere. They didn't stop it. But we were very deliberate about saying people that is the path we're choosing, and we're on public record. So we had people who, work for Atlassian, people in New York where we didn't have an office, like, would, come, work for us. People in, rural locations. 80% of our staff in the UK live outside of London. So we have these people around the world who get to work for us. And, we get the best talent as a result. They stay longer. Our attrition is lower. 92% of them say that they think our remote policies help them to do their best work. And so for me, the opposite is true. Like, I think you have to make the argument why being in an office is the right choice, rather than saying why is remote the right choice.
It's so funny. Every CEO I speak to says today, and they say this behind the scenes, we just see that actually in person is so much better. The engagement's there, the collaboration's there, the culture's there. And there's this real binary flip back. And so it's fascinating to hear yours. Is there anything that you know now about remote that you wish you'd known when you and Mike made that decision?
So one thing we've been working on is we believe that you do need to get together as humans to build human contact and, human connection. And we didn't do that during COVID. And so people, take the COVID is what remote work was, and gee, it was terrible. We didn't get to see anyone. You're like, no, that's great. Like, but you can still see people and work remotely. You just don't need to see them every single day. And so we've done some research now, which we'd known earlier, that, when you get people together, we see our team connectivity boost by 30%. So we ask our staff, how connected do you feel to your team? How connected do you feel to the company? And then we get people together, what we call intentional togetherness. So, and then we ask them, how connected do you feel before and after? And it was just part of our normal monthly cadence, and we cross-reference that with in-office participation. And so the people, we intentionally get them together, get a 30% spike in connectedness to company and connectedness to team. Now, the interesting thing is, if you look at it from an atrophy perspective, right? Like how long does it take to return to baseline? It's 4 to 5 months actually before that returns to the baseline. And so if you actually say, okay, well, if you get together people like 3, 4, 5, 6 times a year, not that frequently, you can maintain a very high connectedness ratio. And we've found that the people that turn up to the office every single day don't actually exceed that. So it's not like, oh, people in the office are here and everyone else is below. No, actually, like that office being in the office doesn't build intentional togetherness. And so we still got to work out exactly how to maximize that over time and what types of intentional togetherness, build the best bonds. And like, is it in an office? Is it doing philanthropy together? Is it going for a hike together? Like what actually forms the best social bonds? But like we're running all these experiments now that, like, of course, if we'd known them earlier, we would have been, much more optimized than we are today.
It's a very big decision to go full remote and to remain full remote. When I spoke to Mike, he said the biggest risk decisions that have been a success have been made by Scott, not by me. When you reflect on, I thought it was very humble of him, but when you reflect on like the biggest risky decisions that you've made that have worked out, which one is the biggest for you? And what did you learn from that?
There's a couple ones that we've made that are risky. I think, look, Team Anywhere is obviously a huge one because, it's not always a one-way door, but like we would burn a whole bunch of, employee trust if we changed that now. And we've got about half our employees don't live near an office. So like it's pretty close to a one-way door decision as you can make. And we made that relatively quickly. And so that was one. Look, another decision we made was to shut down Stride, which was our competitor to Snyk. That was a product that we had been, operating in the market for multiple years. And if I could share some of the lessons of things that we made mistakes on, we acquired this product. It was growing really fast. It was used by us. It was used by devs, and then it went through the entire company. And there's a couple of things that I would have done differently with that. One is that Stride was $2 a month per customer. Like, we just cheap. We're like, enterprise software is $2 a month, a user a month. That's incredible. But Snyk was free and $10 a month. And free is a lot cheaper than $2 a month, even though on average, Snyk made more dollars from us because they eventually converted people. And so, the freemium model basically, can win over time, and you actually get more dollars per customer. So one, I wish we had changed our pricing model. Two is that when you have a small team of like 10 to 12 people, which is what it was when we acquired it, that team runs really, really fast because they don't have overhead and rituals, and they all know each other and they all know where the code is. And when you double that team, you actually don't get any more productivity because when you double the team, they now need to document things. They now need to work separate the code out. They need to start microservices and subsystems and stuff like that. So we doubled the team thinking that we would get more productivity, and we ended up basically staying the same. And so what we really needed to do, was actually triple or quadruple that team in order for us to actually get the productivity that we needed. And lastly is that, it was growing fast. Like that product was growing 3 or 4 times, year on year, which you get if you're growing 300%, 400% year on year, you're like, this is a rocket ship. Awesome. We're doing great stuff. What we didn't realize is we probably should have been going 1,000% per year or more because like the market was so big. And so we didn't invest enough behind it. So anyway, that's the lessons for your listeners.
Was it a tough decision? Because there's a lot of sunk cost fallacy there. Acquisition, team.
Not only had we acquired it, we'd also then rewritten it from scratch, like on our platform. And so we'd done a full rewrite. It ended up not being a hard decision because the way I looked at it was, could I look my staff in the face and say that the next 5 years of their life was going to be the biggest impact to humanity working on this product? And I couldn't look that staff in the eye and say that, hey, working on HitChat Stride, which is the rewritten product, is going to have the biggest impact on the world. Actually, I could repurpose you and move you into other products that have got new ideas that we've got, blue oceans, like to borrow a phrase from the book, where we're not competing head to head against, two players out there. And so in the end, deciding to shut down that product, we had a couple hundred people working on it. It was hard because a lot of people had poured their heart and soul into it. We sold it to Snyk, but in the end, it was easy because I could look at the staff and say, no, you're going to have a bigger impact on the world doing something else.
Scott, do you pay attention to competition?
I think you have to pay attention to competition. Like I think anyone that says they don't is probably a bit silly in terms of how they spend their time. But when I look at the ways we win, like it's often by ignoring the competition and doing something because we listen to customers. And so releasing a new product with Jira Product Discovery for product managers, and it's in a space where there's two big competitors out there. And what we actually built in that space for product managers is actually a different take on solving that problem. And I think if we just copied the competitors, we wouldn't have been as successful. But instead, we saw there was a market there and we built something different. But yeah, we track competitors and see where they're going and how we're growing compared to them.
Scott, I'm loving this conversation. I feel a fast friendship, and so I'm hesitant to bring this up, but I'm going to anyway. When we look at like Jira today, it's a polarizing product. And I spoke to a couple of the biggest CPOs in the world, and they said the challenging thing is it's trended towards catering to power users, while upstarts have appeared that simplify the experience, and it makes it much easier for that new onboarding for new customers. How do you feel when you hear that?
As every product-led CEO wants, like I want my product to appeal to every single user and be the best thing for them to use every single day. One of the benefits of Jira is it can do a lot of things for a lot of people. The great part is you never grow out of Jira. So, no matter what size your engineering team, whether you've got 20 people or 20,000 people working in engineering, like you never grow out of it. So that's the benefit of it. The downside is that, that complexity can sometimes be overwhelming for, some customers. There are two parts of that. One is, the product itself, like we can continually do. And if you look at Jira now versus 5 years ago versus 5 years before that, we continually simplify the product. The other part, unfortunately, is sometimes how it gets set up by people. And sometimes people, complain, hey, Jira's got 14 fields I need to, fill in before I can raise a bug. You're like, well, we don't ship with 14 fields out of the box. Someone has configured it that way, because they've done it over time. And so, sometimes you have to tease out which is the inherent, Jira complexity and like which is the sort of complexity because the Jira admin has decided that you need to fill out 14 fields. But we have a huge investment, like continually simplifying that. But look, we're never going to be as simple as something that, has built from scratch for 5-person team. What we do though is want to do the things that only we can do, which is, hey, we scale with you and we integrate with all the other products that you integrate with, right? We integrate with code, we integrate with build systems, we integrate with security tools, like all the things we can do at scale because, people will build those integrations and we can build those integrations. And so you can, start using a simpler product, but then you don't get like the amazing workflows that we can provide.
You mentioned scaling with teams there, and you mentioned the lesson on Stride being actually the per seat pricing. I've had many guests on the show, including like Miles Grimshaw from Benchmark, obviously where Peter Fenton is, who said that per seat pricing would not exist in a world of AI or would change. Do you agree with that AI changes the per seat pricing model? And how do you view the evolution of pricing with the introduction of AI as a foundational pillar?
AI will put pressure on per seat pricing. I agree with that premise in general. For example, if you provide help desk software and it's, licensed on a per agent basis, and in many cases, our competitors have these things that are $100 an agent a month. If you're Salesforce, it can be $140 a salesperson a month. These are high per seat costs. And in a world of AI, well, if customers can solve issues themselves because an AI agent solved it for you or search solved it for you, then you've got a problem because, well, I can't charge per AI agent. That doesn't make any sense. Like one AI agent is infinite AI agents, so I can't charge that way. So over time, we are going to have to work out how we solve for value. And previously, per user was a good proxy for the value that you provided. I don't think people have worked out what that looks like. And I think it will change based on how many seats, how much you charge per seat. If you're $150, $200 a seat, like you've got a much bigger pricing model change to worry about than if like Atlassian does, we charge $10 a seat. And then how much is going to be augmented by AI versus replaced by AI. So in some cases, it's like, yeah, you'll still need half as many seats. Cool, we'll just, we'll augment them with AI and charge twice as much per seat and everyone, kind of is getting the same value they did before. In some cases, it might be like, hey, we're going to reach 99% of the people and that's not going to make sense. So in general, the premise is true. I don't think we know what we move to. And I don't think software's suddenly going to become free because, per user pricing just doesn't work.
Can I take a different tact? But I do want to cover one more thing before we move into a quick fire. And it's more personal, but obviously with the immense success of Atlassian, finances change. I always ask this one, but I think it's really important. How do you think about your relationship to money today?
I think about this a lot because I've got young children. And I remember actually once Peter Fenton used the words about post-economic. What does that mean, right? I thought about that a lot, and I wouldn't use those words, but there's a relationship between time and money, I think, that you have throughout your life. And I know when I was a teenager and through university, I had a lot more time than I had money. But with most things in life, you can trade time and money. Like if you want to get great concert tickets and you don't have money, you stand in line out the front, stay overnight, like to get the concert tickets. So I think that trade-off actually exists a lot in life. And it doesn't change. If you've got a lot of money, you just the trade-off, the slider moves a lot more. And if you have a lot of time, it goes the other way. I wasn't born from a family that has had a lot of money. And so for me, moving the slider of money and time has actually been a bit of a struggle. Good example, when you take a rental car, like you can fill it up before you go back to the rental agency, or you can get them to fill it up for you, right? And if they fill it up, they charge a premium on the fuel that you put back in there. But it probably saves you 20 minutes of running around trying to find the fuel station or whatever. And at the end of the day, it might only cost you $5 more, to get them to fill it up. And so things like that, I've really struggled to move that. And over time,
have you got better?
I'm getting better. Like I think that if you achieve a lot in life and, you have more money, then, getting the time back to be able to devote it to other things is useful. And particularly with kids, it's like, hey, if I spend money, I can spend more time with my kids. That's a great trade-off.
Is it difficult with children? I had David Velez on the show from Newbank, and he said his number one concern right now is bringing children up in a world of huge wealth and retaining humility and ambition and hunger.
I think it is a very difficult thing to do. I don't think I've cracked the code on that. Even if we try and isolate our children from that, I bought an expensive house in Sydney, and my kids' friends at school talk to them about it and how much it costs. And so that, like, no matter how much you try and isolate your kids from that, it can be, something that you just don't have the opportunity to do that. And so for me, it's just trying to teach kids the value of money and and also just being a good human being. I definitely haven't cracked that, and my kids are still young, so I don't know if I'll have done a good job for another decade or so.
Final one, I promise, and then we do a quick fire. You have an amazing relationship with Kim, your wife, through an incredible journey with Atlassian. What's the secret to a happy marriage?
I think putting your partner on a pedestal is really important, to do that. And there's a great book actually talks. It's the one thing. I think it's the one thing you need to know, or the one thing, I can't remember, by Marcus Buckingham, but a whole bunch of research that shows that couples that put each other on a pedestal actually do better than couples that are realistic about their, the opposing person. And I don't know, I feel like I've always put my wife, Kim, on a pedestal. Like she's the most amazing person on every front, like whether it's work or friends or family or our own nuclear family. And so she's my best friend by a long way, and we've had a shared journey. And then lastly, I've learned how to say sorry quickly when I screw something up. And I feel like that's something she taught me. She taught me to just, I'd do something bad or whatever, and she'd just tell me, say sorry. And for about 5 years, I'd like dig my heels in and be like, no, why would I do that? And then I think for the last, we celebrated 20 years a month ago. So for the last 15 years, I think I've learned that when you're wrong, just say sorry.
I asked another very famous tech billionaire the other day, what's the secret? And he said, compromise and patience. You must compromise and you must be patient. I was like, okay, good stuff. I'm glad this is one way. Listen, Scott, I want to move into a quick fire. So I say a short statement, you give me your immediate thoughts. Does that sound okay?
Let's do it.
What's your vision for the future of education? Mike said I had to ask this one.
About a decade and a half ago, we were doing some experiments. So two things came together. One is I read a book called Leaving Microsoft to Change the World, which is a guy named John Wood started a foundation nonprofit called Room to Read, and their motto is world change starts with educated children. So I read this book and I was inspired by it, but wasn't sure how to impact it in any way. And then the second one was that we were experimenting with changing our pricing model at Atlassian, because though most software cost 6 figures at the time, the cheapest version of Atlassian was $1,200. And we thought, no, it should be free or it should be cheap or it should be, how do we change that? And so we ran an experiment, in the sort of true lean startup way. We ran an experiment to work out what our new pricing model should be. And so we said, let's make our software $5 for 5 users for 5 days only. And we ran basically a 1-week campaign to just see, well, is there a desire for a 5-user version of our software? And by the way, all the money goes to charity. And so we, as a company, then had bets like, how much are we going to raise in 5 days? Is it going to be $3,000, $5,000? The highest bet we had was $20,000. So at the end of 5 days, in $5 increments, we raised just over $100,000 for charity, which is crazy when you think about like 20,000 transactions, like 4,000 a day. I think it's like, if I could do the math, it's about 1 every 20 seconds averaged over that period of time. So totally crazy. And then I called up John Wood after reading this book and said, hey, we've got this big check, like one of those ones you see on TV, for $100,000 to your charity. And he's like, hey, you're from what country? Like, and I've never heard of you. And so he flew down to Sydney, and we gave him a big check for $100,000. And that started our relationship with Rem to Read. That kind of has been multi-million dollars over time. And of course, all the philanthropy stuff ended up inspiring me to start Pledge 1%, which is, a foundation that encourages startups and companies to give 1% of equity, product profit, and employee time to nonprofits. And that's inspired about 18,000 companies to pledge as well. So I guess it's a long answer, but effectively, a few things came together to start a philanthropy journey.
Listen, I had Cliff from Canva on the show, and he spoke about giving away most of his wealth. And as a venture investor, I naturally asked, why? It seemed we had some differences of opinion, but I appreciate his philanthropic mind. Tell me, Scott, what have you changed your mind on in the last year?
Don't think I have a really good answer for what I've changed my mind on in the last year. I think I take a while to make up my mind, so I don't run to snap judgments on things. Like, it takes me a long time to get certain about things. So that's either a blessing or a curse, but I don't really change my mind very often.
What have you been wrong on in the last year?
I don't have a good answer. What's more than I used to be, I think, is the answer, because
I thought public markets would be hit way worse than they have been. They've been a lot more resilient. We're actually in a better place than I thought.
For me, that's going to be what it's going to be. Like, I don't, make bets about that or have opinions. And we made a bet. We thought that it would go down roughly this, and we were, roughly right in terms of where we made our investments. So the public market stuff is not a big thing. But on the being right part, I'm trying to get better at basically saying, well, someone else might be right, and we'll find out in the future, and sort of disagree and commit a lot more than I used to be. I think that was an area where I would, dig my heels in a lot and try and prove that I was right. But these days I'm like, actually, more often than not, the other person is right. So I'm trying to let go of that.
Scott, with respect, you're a pretty calm guy. How do you retain serenity when things are really going to shit?
For me, daily exercise, and I get, I try and be in bed for 8 hours a night. They make a big difference to me. Like, I wasn't always like that, but I have been the last decade or so.
You could have dinner with anyone, dead or alive. Who do you have dinner with, and why them?
I've got 3 boys, and if I could have dinner with them when they're 6 years old again, individually or together, like, that would be like who I'd love to, have dinner with.
What does being a great father mean to you?
I want to have a great relationship with my kids, and I want them to speak daily. I speak weekly with my kids, like when in 20 years' time. And so for me, like, I want them to make great life choices. I'll be proud of their life choices, and I want them to want to spend time with me in a decade or two.
Is there a trade-off between being the best in the world at something and being a great father? Respectfully, the travels, the intense demands, the quarterly reporting, the pressure that comes from being a public CEO and being there for bedtime and stories.
Everyone has the same 168 hours in a week. And there will be people out there who are way better fathers than I am because they spend more time, and that is their life's calling. So for me, it's making all the trade-offs between all the different things I have of being fit and my responsibilities to family, responsibilities to work. And so if I devoted 100% of my time to all the things, I chose not to have a family, I would probably be better at work than I am today. And if I chose not to do work, I'd be a better father. But I just try and make the balance between all the different things that I have.
Scott, what's the kindest thing anyone's ever done for you?
I think believe in me, like, I think is the nicest thing. So whether that is Mike or, who believed in me to, start Atlassian and invite me, like, kind of to like start a company with him, or our first chairperson, who, was a very, very successful business person. But the times I think that I feel the biggest kindness are where people, believe in your ability or believe in the potential.
I spoke to Mike before the show. It was just clear that the true depth and bluntly love you have for each other in terms of friendship. What do you think makes you such great co-founders and partners?
I think co-founder relationships much like a marriage. Like it's a very intense relationship. I think both Mike and I have we're very different people in terms of how we see the world. Like, Mike will have 100 ideas in a day and be comfortable if he goes to bed and one of them survives the day to the next one. And, I'm probably much more methodical and thoughtful about how we do it. But I think the success has been that we both complement each other incredibly well. And I think we both know that Atlassian wouldn't be the success it is today if it wasn't for the two of us.
When we look forward at the next 10 years, final one, if everything goes to plan, where are we then? 2033, we're chatting, Byron Bay, Noosa, wherever we want to be.
I am just super excited about the opportunities that we can do for helping teams work together. And so some parts of AI, some parts just doing more for our customers across the board. And so if I think about, how much busy work happens every single day across an organization, how much content you need to do, or how much work there is about work. It's like, what do I need to get done today? What's the best thing I should do next? There is so much of that happens. There are so many dysfunctional teams where, if we all had better emotional intelligence and we could work together better, we would love our work more. There's so many people being dragged into the workplace and commuting in 2 hours each way to turn up to a desk and sit on a Zoom call. There's so much we can do to improve how work happens for people, for teams, for organizations. And we're just getting started really in doing that. And so some of that'll be AI, some of that'll be just training people, some will be helping people have higher emotional intelligence. There's so much stuff we can do there. And we'll never be done with that, but hopefully in another, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years time, we'll be better than we are today.
Scott, as you heard before, I did my work, but I so enjoyed this. It shows like this where you actually have real conversations. The script is kind of left aside. It just reminds me why I'm so lucky to do what I do. So thank you so much for being so great. And I've loved doing this.
I appreciate it, Harry. Thanks for the time.